This presentation is entitled Monitoring and Managing Spider Mites in Florida Hops. Spider mites do not damage hops cones under typical conditions, even at relatively high numbers. They cause indirect damage by feeding on the leaf, which can interfere with photosynthesis. Economic thresholds have not been established for spider mites on hops, and it is unknown if low or moderate numbers of spider mites will interfere with cone quality or quantity. However, our experience at GCREC and data from Germany indicate that hops can tolerate high mite numbers without reductions in yield or cone quality. Spider mites are not the only arthropod pests found feeding on Florida hops, but since the hops program began at GCREC in 2016, spider mites have consistently been the only pest of concern. In the image on the left, you can see the two dark green spots on the spider mite that give it its common name, and you can also see the many globe-shaped spider mite eggs. In the image on the right, you can see a typical spider mite infestation, which starts next to the larger veins on the underside of the leaf. All life stages are present, including eggs, nymphs, males, and females, so you will see individuals of different sizes and slightly different colors. Spider mites feed by puncturing plant cells and sucking out the plant sap. Damaged plant cells appear yellow. In addition to two spotted spider mites, there are other types of spider mite that attack hops, including red spider mites. You can see the round spider mite eggs in this image, indicated by red arrows. As mite infestations grow, leaves develop a scraped appearance and webbing is present. Under warm, dry conditions, spider mites can go from being an egg to a female producing eggs in about 8 days. This short generation time enables populations to grow quickly. Monitoring pests in hops is challenging because it is not practical to monitor the upper canopy of the crop. Pest observations are typically made at ground level. In the fall of 2019, we used a lift to carry out weekly observations of hops pests in the upper canopy as well as at ground level in order to determine if ground level observations were representative of what was happening in the upper canopy. This figure shows the average number of spider mite eggs and motiles, which are adults and nymphs, per leaf from weekly sampling in the fall of 2019. The dashed lines are eggs and the solid lines are adults and nymphs. The red lines indicate numbers from the upper canopy and the blue lines are numbers from ground level. You can see when you compare the dashed red line and the dashed blue line that egg numbers were consistently higher in the upper canopy than at ground level. The solid red line, representing spider mite adults and nymphs in the upper canopy, is also consistently higher than the solid blue line, representing spider mite adults and nymphs at ground level. In preparation for monitoring spider mites and other pests in your hop yard, create a map of your production area where you can make notes of pest numbers. We examine 100 plants each week, but the number of plants you scout will depend on the size of your hop yard and the resources that you have available. Be sure to enter the hop yard from a different point each week when you scout and to follow a different pattern so that you look at different plants each week. This is the best way to detect new infestations and to track established infestations. Using a hand lens with at least 10x magnification, examine the underside of 3 or 4 leaves on the plants you select. Note the presence or absence of spider mites on the plant. Record information on the severity of the infestation if possible. When 10% of the plants observed have spider mites, we order the predatory mite Phytocilus persimilis from a commercial insectary and make the first release into the hop yard. Persimilis usually need to be ordered several days in advance, but they are shipped by overnight delivery to maintain their viability. They should be applied to the hop yard the day they arrive or first thing the following day. Persimilis can be purchased in different quantities and containers. We purchase containers of 2,000 Persimilis. Containers include vermiculite or a similar packing material and bran mites as a food source for the predatory mites. One shake of the container delivers about 5 mites. We apply 1 shake to the base of every plant in the hop yard, although Persimilis could be applied at a lower frequency if the spider mite population is low. 1 container of 2,000 Persimilis is enough to treat about 400 plants. In the image on the lower left, you can see a Persimilis mite feeding on a 2-spotted spider mite. And in the image on the lower right, you can see a Persimilis feeding on a spider mite egg. Persimilis are a distinctive pale ruby color, and their legs are much longer than the legs of spider mites. In this video, you can see a Persimilis mite attacking a 2-spotted spider mite. There are clear differences in color, body shape, and the length of the legs. However, you will remember that some spider mites are dark red, so it shouldn't be assumed that all red mites are Persimilis. With practice, it is possible to distinguish predatory mites from pest mites using a hand lens, and to keep track of the relative numbers of each over time after releases of predators are made. After Persimilis are released, weekly scouting should continue, and the presence of Persimilis and other predators should be noted in addition to the presence of spider mites and other pests. Take Ziploc bags to the field and collect samples to examine them inside under a microscope, or if you wish to submit them to a specialist for identification. As you track the development of pest and predatory populations over time, keep in mind that warm, dry weather favors spider mites, and rainy weather can put spider mites at a disadvantage. We have observed several naturally occurring predators attacking spider mites on hops, including Amblesius and Neocoelus species of predatory mites. The Amblesius mites are glassy or pearly in color, while the predominant Neocoelus species observed is a dark, irregular red color. Like Persimilis, they both have legs that are much longer than spider mites. The primary difference between these naturally occurring predators and Persimilis is that Persimilis only feeds on spider mites, while Amblesius and Neocoelus attack other pests and can survive for a period of time on pollen. In the right-hand image, you can also see the oval shape of the predator eggs indicated by red arrows. In addition to naturally occurring mite predators, we have seen insect predators of spider mites and hops also. Stethurus is a predatory beetle related to ladybird beetles that is sometimes found feeding on spider mites and hops at GCREC. The brown larva is visible in the top of this image. In this video, you can see a trash bug feeding on a spider mite egg. Trash bugs are lacewings that pile debris, including the carcasses of their prey, on their backs. We quite frequently find trash bugs feeding on spider mites and hops at GCREC. During the past couple of years, we have begun making a second Persimilis release 2 weeks after the first release. However, in 2019, in the fall, we made the second release 1 week after the first release. In this figure, the black arrows show when those 2 releases were made, and the dates, September 10th and 17th, are highlighted in yellow. You can see that in the week following the second release, September 24th, the spider mite numbers had continued to increase, particularly the eggs. But by 2 weeks after the second release, the week of October 1st, the numbers had begun to decline. And by 3 weeks after the second release, the week of October 8th, spider mite egg and motile numbers had really become negligible. And this reduction in spider mites was associated not just with activity by the Persimilis that we had released, but also by predation carried out by the naturally occurring predators that we have just discussed. This table shows the miticides labeled for use on hops in Florida. There are other insecticides labeled for mite management on hops in Florida, but it is not advisable to use broad-spectrum insecticides such as carbamates, organophosphates, or pyrethroids for spider mite management. Active ingredient names are listed in the left-hand column, followed by a number in parentheses indicating the number of applications that can be made per crop. Most miticides can only be applied once per crop. The limitation on Agromec, Canomite, and Movento is twice per calendar year. So if you produce a hops crop in the spring and also in the fall, these 3 insecticides can only be applied once per crop. The mode of action group number is listed second from the left, and the trade name examples for each active ingredient are listed in the central column. Only Agromec SC is a restricted use insecticide from this group. The column on the right indicates the pre-harvest interval in days. All of the miticides registered for use on hops have a PHI of at least 7 days. We have used a Pack Blast sprayer to apply miticides to the hop yard at GCREC with mixed results. In 2019, we placed water-sensitive cards at 3, 9, and 18 feet off the ground in several rows in the hop yard prior to the application of a miticide treatment in order to get an understanding of how well our spray equipment was offering coverage of the crop. This slide shows an example of the results. Where moisture contacts the yellow card, it turns blue. While many cards throughout the hop yard were mostly blue, plenty of them were mostly yellow, particularly in the upper canopy, indicating that spray coverage was inadequate. You'll remember that spider mite densities tend to be higher in the upper canopy than at ground level. Since we started working with hops in 2016, we have observed caterpillars and lace bugs occasionally damaging the crop. On the left are images of typical armyworm egg clusters, and on the right are images of lace bugs and the damage they cause. While we have sprayed for these pests in the past, we have learned that naturally occurring natural enemies tend to keep most pests in check if we rely on Persimilis for spider mite management. In the fall of 2019, when we relied exclusively on Persimilis for spider mite management and did not apply any insecticides, we had no other appreciable pests. Many types of pests were observed at low numbers, but natural biological control was common. We observed high numbers of generalist predators, and while caterpillars, whiteflies, and other pests were observed, they were usually parasitized or eventually attacked by naturally occurring fungal pathogens. Insecticide and miticide applications to control spider mites seem to flare other pests, possibly by disrupting natural control. Biological control is an option for managing spider mites, in part because they do not transmit viruses to hops, and they do not cause damage to the cone under typical circumstances. Releasing Persimilis once spider mite levels reach 10% and making 1 or 2 follow-up releases at 2-week intervals seems to be a viable option for spider mite management on hops in Florida. Over the past couple years, we have begun applying miticides a couple weeks after the second Persimilis release, but the results do not seem superior to relying solely on Persimilis, and other pests have tended to flare after applications of miticides. If you have any questions, please contact me. This research was funded by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Specialty Crop Block Grant Program.